Hi guys, and welcome back to Dizzy Sew and Sew. Today we're going to have a look at this Kwik Sew pattern for a pair of children's dungarees. It's Kwik Sew Pattern 3948, and we're going to have a bash. On the pattern itself it says how much fabric you're going to need, and for our size we're going to need about 1 metre. So I've got 1 metre of this needle cord. It's a lovely, nice plain colour, but it's for a conservative young gentleman, so hopefully he's going to like it. Firstly, what you're going to do is take out your pattern, and what I do is I trace all the pattern pieces, cut them out onto tracing paper, so that if I need to make another size, I've still got the original pattern which I can then trace a larger size to make for someone else, and it's a great way of saving on cost that way. Step 1, pin the side pocket to the front, and this is pattern part 1 and this is pattern part 7. So these are the right sides, so I need to flip this over because it's right sides together. Line it up, pin and sew. Okay. The pattern states a 5/8 inch seam allowance, which is 1.5 centimetres, and that's throughout the sewing. Unless it states otherwise, I'll tell you. But most of the pattern, or most of the sewing, is at 1.5 centimetres. So make sure you keep your seam allowances all the same. Otherwise, you'll get, if you change them, you'll get baggy bits and tight bits. The next step is to trim off the seam allowance and cut into this corner just to give it a bit of relief, so when you turn it round, which we're going to do in a minute, it doesn't pull the garment out of shape. Now turn the pocket to the wrong side, and in the instructions it says roll it in a little bit. What they mean by that is to make sure the seam is rolled just towards the back of the garment, so towards the pocket side, this being the front. There's your pocket, so just roll it towards the pocket, and then what they want us to do is to double top stitch along the pocket edge. So let's do that. So when you're doing top stitching, the closer you can get to this edge the better, and the second row, make it a set distance. I often line up the previous set of stitching with the outside edge of my presser foot to run along that stitching line, and that will give me the same gap between the 2 rows of stitching. Turn this to the front that's face down, and then fold it in half. And then we're going to zigzag stitch, or straight stitch and then zigzag stitch. If you've got an overlocker, use that, that's great. This edge here. So what you should end up with is a nice folded over pocket. We turn it right side up. We should have a nice double row of stitching, and then our notches lined up at the top and at the sides. So we've got our 2 front parts of the trousers, and we've double stitched along here, and we've put a little bit of basting stitches along here and across here to hold the pocket in place while we work on the rest of the garment. Now the next step in the instructions is wrong because it says pin front to back. Right, the back's a totally different part of the pattern. It got me confused. So what I actually mean is pin the 2 fronts together along this seam here. We've sewn from our inside leg seam all the way up to the waist seam, and then it says to press open the fabric to the right and then double top stitch again, but that leaves raw edges on the inside. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a flat fell seam by trimming the right hand seam allowance, folding the left hand seam allowance over the top to encompass it, and then doing 2 rows of top stitching on there. But there's a tutorial on the website and on the YouTube videos on how to do a flat fell seam, so familiarise yourself with that if you're going to do this method, and then come back to this. Now it's time to add the bib front, so pop it on the front there, match up the centres. Once you've pinned your bib in place, turn it over, take the pins out or leave a couple in, and then we want to put on our facing, making sure that we line up the notches in the centre and the 2 side notches. Once you've got the bib pinned on, the facing pinned on, make sure it's right. This is the right side, and this is obviously the wrong side. So right side to wrong side. Make sure that's all pinned in nicely. Then we can do our seam across the top. So we've sewn along the top with our 5/8 inch seam allowance, and we've got all this bulk to get rid of. Now a good way to do that is to trim one seam allowance really short, then the next seam allowance just a little bit longer, and then the third seam allowance just leave alone. So it gradually grades in, and it will be less of a great big bulging dip. So we're going to do that, and then we want to press with our iron. We want to press up this inside facing so the seam's all nice, and press up our bib seam. And then once we've done that, we can top stitch along this edge, and we'll fold over a nice, make sure this is all very even, press it flat, and then we'll top stitch along the top edge of the facing. Okay, so we put 2 rows of top stitching along here, one very close to the edge, and then one half a presser foot width to match the pocket double stitching, and then this line of stitching holds that back facing on right at the top here, very, very close to the edge, which has come out right really nicely. And it's at this point that if you want a bib pocket, I'm not going to put any of the patch pockets on in this project. It's nice and simple. We'll do another tutorial on that if we need to, but it's at this point that they want you to put the patch pocket on. Personally, I'd have put it on, the patch pocket on, before we attached it to the legs of the garment. But that's just my preference. It's easier to work with a single piece of fabric without having all the legs and everything pulling around. The next step is to attach our straps to our leg backs or our dungaree backs, and we do that by matching the notches. Don't worry about the fact that it overhangs or is too short there, because when you put your 5-inch seam allowances, you'll notice that they'll match perfectly. So there we are with our straps attached to our legs, and you'll see you've got the seam allowances sticking out either side. So just trim those off and neaten them up. It's at this point that the pattern goes on to put some rip-wrap or ribbon on the front, and then just says overcast the back. I'm going to do the same flat fell seam as we did before by trimming. Going back to this step, we fold in 2 centimeters here, which we've already done. But when we stitch across the top, make our seam allowance 2 centimeters, because the next step is to fold all this edge in 2 centimeters. And if we've done a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance here for this stitching, we won't be able to fold it over 2 centimeters, it'll only be 1.5. It's not the end of it. Folded it over 2 centimeters and pressed it, we're then going to fold under 1 centimeter. And then we're going to top stitch very close to the edge, and we're going to top stitch close to this edge. We do that both sides. Now the next step is to put the two pieces together. If you can see here, you may well have put ribbon or a bit of rip wrap there. It's really important when lining this on top of this that the seams or your ribbon line up really well. So the 2 points are for lining up. This is this top edge here, and this seam. If you can get those lined up really well before you sew, you're going to have a really great looking garment. The next step now is to join the front and the backs together. So, being very careful to line up and match the notches. On the edges here, 2 notches. We'll pin them together, and we'll do the same for this side, and we'll pin those together. And then we're going to sew along this edge with our 1.5 centimetre seam allowance all the way to the where I've marked as a white line. On the pattern it's a dot, and that's where we're going to stop, and then we're going to overlock or overcast this edge. So we're just going to zigzag along that edge basically, and to neaten it up. Okay, we're on to the next step, which is the cuffs of the trousers. Now the pattern suggested you use a contrasting fabric. I've gone for the same fabric just for ease of the project, but it does come up with a really nice finish if you have put a bit of your own style into it. But anyway, moving on, we need to pin the front cuff and the back cuff together at the outside leg seam. So basically we're going to pin it like so, and then we're going to sew down there, and then we're going to trim off the excess, which we'll see why later. But I always find it helpful to have the pattern piece when I'm doing the laying out, because I've transferred all my instructions and bits and pieces onto the pattern. So if I have any queries, it's right there for me to use. Okay, so we've sewn our cuffs together at the outside seam, and now we're going to pin them onto our trouser leg, lining up at the outside seam and the notches. And we're going to pin the wrong side of the trouser leg to the right side of the cuff. Of our cuff, and this is the right side of our trouser leg, and you can see the seam there which we've trimmed nice and neat. What we want to do is fold it up along that seam, using our iron to press it nice and straight with steam. And then do that all the way along, and then we want to come back 1 centimetre and press again. So we've got this nice neat cuff, and then once we've done that, we are going to top stitch close to the edge all the way along the top. So here we've got the right side of our yoke, and we're basically going to fold over that facing strip like so, and hold it there. You can see it lines up at the edge. Give it a good press, and then we're going to sew the 2 centimetres along here. So that's basically the edge of my ruler. That's the angle of your stitching. So along there, not 2 centimetres like that, but like this. And then we're going to turn it round the other way and bring it back to our ironing board. I just trimmed the inside of that corner so that when we turn it out, the right side out, like we have done here, we don't get a huge bulk and we're left with a nice sharp point on the top edge in underneath. So we're left with about 1 centimetre double hem, and then we can top stitch all the way along the outside edge and all the way along the inside edge, giving a nice neat double row of finished stitching. So we have the garment with the front here and the back here, and the next step is to press open or press frontwards these side seams and double top stitch those. And also we're going to run a bar tack, which I'll show you in a minute how to do one of those, across the top here where the stitching finishes. So when the garment's being pulled to go on and off, that extra strength will stop the seam from coming undone. So I've lined up my presser foot where I want my bar tack to go, and this is at the top where the side seam ends and the opening begins. So it's nice and simple. You want to have a zigzag on your machine and set it to about half a stitch length. And then slowly walk forward across the top of that seam, and just back stitch, stop them coming undone. And there's your bar tack. So now we've dealt with the side seams and what have you, it's now time to move on to the inner leg opening. And you can use bias tape for this. Just trim off one edge of the bias tape, or you can use ribbon like myself. Make sure you've got a bit of an overlap at this end, because we're going to fold that back under, and we want to pin the tape all the way along to the other end, making sure again at that end we leave again another overlap to finish that. And once we've pinned it, we're going to sew all the way along this edge with a 6mm seam allowance. Okay, now we've sewn on our ribbon, the next step, or our bias tape, the next step is to attach it on the inside. So this is the wrong side, the inside of the garment. I'm just folding back the tape, or the ribbon, and then we fold it over. Now, I don't know if you can see here, I'm folding over just past the seam, so no red is seen on the outside. So we basically just rolled the seam over that way a little bit. And we'll do that all the way along, and then we can top stitch. So there's our inside tape attached, and now it's time to put the fastenings on. And we need one either side of the centre seam, one down the bottom and then two in the middle. So just start by marking the positions of all your fastenings, and then using these Vario pliers, which they have a cutter in at the moment. Go and cut all your holes in one go, but make sure and double check before you put the holes in that you're happy with the positioning. Bearing in mind the diameter of your fasteners, because you don't want to put the hole too near the edge and then find out that your fastener hangs over the edge. That'll be no good at all. So make sure it's nice and central within that bias binding or your ribbon, whichever you've used. pattern says now to make your buttonholes for your side fastening and your dungaree clips, but as I have an abundance of poppers, I'm going to go popper mad and stick in some more poppers, and then I'm going to stick in the opposite part of the popper on here, just 3 or 4, so it can be adjusted as they grow. What I've done here is I've lined up both parts, the front and the back, or the front and the back, and I'm ready to make the hole. I'm going to do the hole at the same time, so I know it all lines up and it won't buckle if the fastenings are misplaced. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Just going to take this pin out, make my hole, and then put my fastening there. So there's our hole, and when I put the fastenings in, they'll be exactly in the right place. And I'm going to use a nice bright fastening as opposed to the gummet or grey ones for the legs, because you don't really want them seen around the legs, but at the top here you do. It's a bit of a feature. So a nice bright chrome button. So there you go, a pair of dungarees for a small toddler. I hope you enjoy making them as much as I've done. And looking forward to seeing how you've changed them to make it suit yourself or your toddler or whoever you're making it for. I mean, we went a bit popper-tastic on this with a million poppers, but I think they're really functional, they're really easy to use, they're cheap, and I think the contrasting buttons really do add to the dungarees. So thanks for watching Dizzy Sew and Sew. Don't forget to put your dungarees or a photo of your dungarees that you've made on the Facebook page so everyone can see how hard you've been working, and I look forward to seeing you on the next project. Don't forget to subscribe.